right, here we go. Not only I've got a full-time job at the Maritime Museum, I've also got another full-time job at the Naval Historical Society, as you can see on this slide. I've joined it as a volunteer, and I'm also on the management committee running a speakers program across Australia. And after a very successful harbour cruise, taking people around the harbour for the midget sub-attack to all the locations where things happened, we're putting together Navy harbour cruises. The first one's complete, which is east of the bridge, and we're putting together the second one, including all the excitement of the Cockatoo Island. So I'll be able to come back to you and offer a very interesting cruise around the harbour. While we're cruising from place to place, you'll get to hear all of the customs and traditions of the Navy. Some you'll laugh about, and some you'll probably not laugh at all. But tonight, we're all about the Captain Cook graving dock. The Navy Historical Society produces a lot of books, and it's produced this one, and it's also had the dock heritage listed. So it's over 75 years old. Now, here's our latest, one of our latest ships in it, the landing helicopter dock, HMAS Adelaide. And you think, all right, that's interesting. What's really interesting is have a look at the size of these two sailors here, Navy people here, and compare that to the size of the ship. That's one of our latest ones. The president is David Michael. The people here are all workers, so he edited this book on which the presentation is based. And John Jeremy does all the work, the design work, etc. John Jeremy was the CEO of Cockatoo Island for 10 years and is the vice president. So if you want to know anything about the Navy or ships, you ask John. So it was Australia's second largest engineering project. The largest was, of course, the Snowy scheme, and then the Captain Cook dock, which was larger than the Harbour Bridge, and the Opera House is down below that. So this was a massive project. But let's put having a dock like this in perspective. We're an island nation. The use of the sea is critical to us and our neighbours, New Zealand. We've got around us Indonesia, all island nations. And it's important from an economic and security perspective. When I read the Herald this morning to find out North Korea had 70 submarines, China had 70, we had 6. Just imagine if they blockaded our ports, what COVID may be doing some economic damage. But if our ports were blockaded, our economy would just be destroyed. We're the 5th largest user of shipping. And when Britain was at its zenith, it commanded the sea. It had the Grand Fleet, which was absolutely unchallenged. Germany never wanted to go up against it. It's very difficult to achieve that today. And we need to remember that nearly everything moves by sea. People move by air. And of course, once you're in international waters, you can go anywhere. Not so in the air. You can declare a no-go zone over the air over your country. So having access to the sea and protecting yourself was pretty critical. Let me go back. Now, the other important thing about dock, and of course it involves the maintenance of ships. A modern ship today requires, as it says here, more human skills and technical and scientific knowledge than any other work of man. I got that challenged a while ago, which said, look, putting somebody into space is a lot more challenging than that. But you're working in a dangerous environment here. It is a little bit different. And of course, to have this capacity and capability is critical to Australia. And we need to be independent with little reliance on others if possible. John Jeremy told me an interesting story. He said, well, we needed some spare parts when we had the Oberon submarines in the 80s, and we needed to get approval for a design change that we were going to make. When we called the Admiralty in Britain, they said, look, come back in some months' time. We're busy waging a war down in the Aucklands. We don't have time to deal with you. So if that's the sort of situation you can get in. So what was the design of it? To accommodate the largest warships at that point in time and the huge ocean liners, which at that point in time were the Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth, and with all of the other facilities, create a world-class dockyard. Here's the King George V, the largest battleship at the time. It could be fitted in there. Here it is in the dock at a later time. And of course, here's the Queen Elizabeth itself. Don't have a photo in the dock, but here it is. If you're not aware, the Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary were converted to troop transports from 2,000 passengers to 5,500 troops. And that was done at Cockatoo Island, done in Sydney Harbour. And if you're wondering, can we fit the huge liner into the dock? Yes, it is. Here's a Holland America line, huge liner in the dock. So let's have a look at what we're going to have a look at. The docks in Sydney Harbour, it wasn't the first dock by a long shot. The docks on Cockatoo Island, which serviced all of the ships during the war. Then Garden Island itself, it was an island. And then how a dock works, some timeline of how this was built, some statistics to give you some idea of the massive undertaking, the design, construction, the caissons, which, if you like, are the gates to the dock. Well, how did we do this during wartime? The workforce that was brought together. And during the war, the government had war artists. They wanted to record all of this. So we'll have a look and you'll see some famous artists that were at the dock recording the construction of it. Then last, of course, the opening ceremony. So some of the docks that were in existence during wartime and before, Mort's dock at Balmain. This is a French warship in there. And also they built ships. One of the ships they built, which you may remember, is the Armidale. The Armidale was where Teddy Sheehan got his Victoria Cross. So, and here we've got Woolwich Dock. This is a massive dock here, a lot longer than Cockatoo, but there's no other facilities to maintain the ships. It's a dock. And here it is today. It's used just for boats to be brought alongside. So Cockatoo Island has got two docks, a Fitzroy and the Sutherland dock. They were expanded during their lifetime, and Woolwich was at 260 metres, much larger than any, but didn't have the facilities to service warships. And once again, if you go back to those numbers, the King George battleship was never going to fit into Cockatoo. It's 227 metres long. Here's a pretty poor photo, actually, of Cockatoo. This is the Sutherland dock here. Here's the Fitzroy dock. And here are the slips where ships were built at Cockatoo Island. This is Australia 2, our flagship in World War I in Fitzroy dock. And here's one of the ships that were built at Cockatoo being launched. One of the really interesting things they did at Cockatoo was this thing here is called a slave dock. The slave dock comes in, it's sunk in the dock, then a submarine the dock's flooded, submarine's brought in, it slowly is put down onto the slave dock. Then the slave dock, the water is taken out of it, and then the dock is flooded, so the slave dock rises. And now you can take the submarine on the slave dock off to a wharf. The reason you do this, when you refit a submarine, it takes 2 years. You don't want something going wrong in a submarine when it's submerged. So every bit of equipment, apart from the large engines, etc., are brought out of the submarine, tested, replaced if necessary. So here's a bit of fun here. If you're a member of the painters and dockers, when a ship went into a dock at Cockatoo, a bit of the water would be pumped out. They would bring in these punts with men on, and they would start scraping all of the marine growth off the hull, and then, of course, some of the anti-foul paint. Then they would lower the water again and do the next section of the ship. And if you remember the painters and dockers, they weren't the easiest union to deal with. Now, of course, all this stuff, the marine growth And the anti-foul paint, of course, is designed to kill all marine growth that comes to touch it. So it's extraordinarily poisonous. Is guess at this point in time where all that stuff went. It went out into the harbour, and in many cases is still outside the docks. So why do you do all of this? If you've got marine growth on your hull, it's going to reduce your speed and increase your fuel consumption. There's a couple of chemicals there which are deadly poisonous, and they don't go away very quickly. But fortunately, in 2008, they were banned, and now less dangerous chemicals are used. I know all about this, as you probably know. I've got a yacht, and for years I used to scrape all the stuff off. Don't do it anymore, pay somebody to do it. So here's Garden Island. It started life in 1788 with the first fleet, with a garden on board, which is why it was called Garden Island, for the crew of Sirius to stop scurvy, growing the vegetables there. And in 1811, it became a governor's estate, taken for the use of the governor, and then the Navy in 1866. And during the construction of this dock, it was joined to the mainland. It's no longer an island. Got lots of lovely historic buildings, which we'll see, and of course, a major Navy base today. Here's Garden Island as it was after the first fleet. There have been some buildings constructed. You can see it's two hills. This hill was demolished and all of the material was used to enlarge the island. Here it is at a later date. You can see the hammerhead crane, etc. And here's a much later photo. You can see our two Adelaide-class ships here. Let's just have a look at some of the historic buildings, beautiful old historic buildings. That's the clock tower, the admin building. The Naval Historical Society do conduct a tour. It's the only way you're ever going to see all of the ships and the dock itself. You can't just wander around. The security is such. And of course, well, if you're going to be able to do what this motto says, fight and win at sea, you better have ships that are in good condition. And that's the importance of the dock. So why is it called a graving dock? If you can remember the Les Mis movie, where hundreds of convicts were pulling a ship in, is when a wooden ship reached its end of life. It was brought in on a slipway, actually, not a dock, and dismantled. The good pieces of timber were kept to go into a new ship, and the first of its type was in 1495. But of course, at later dates, ships were brought into docks to clean them and seal the wooden components. And today, believe it or not, the huge liners water blasted, the marine growth. All of this done is by robotic machines. There's very few people involved. So if we're going to put a ship into a dock, when the ship is built, there's a docking plan built as well, and it shows the shape of the under the hull, and it also shows where all of the weight is, the heavy stuff inside, and where to put keel blocks. So when the ship settles on these keel blocks, it won't damage itself. If you get this wrong, you're in big trouble. Then you flood the dock. The caisson is removed, the ship is brought into the dock, and one of the interesting things is the large ships are typically brought in by a small tug. So now, what are you going to do when you pump the water out? Well, the cranes around the dock can lift a couple of 100 tons. You put some slings on the tug, pick it up and put it back in the ocean where it belongs. So you very carefully position the ship over the keel blocks, start to pump the water out, and as it goes down, you send down divers to verify that it is in the right position, which is critical, and then the dock is completely drained and you can do work. Here's a shot of the dock completely full. This is ready. This is the caisson here. That's about to be taken out so we can bring a ship in. And here's HMS Illustrious, seriously damaged by kamikaze attacks. It was brought in an emergency repair situation before the dock was formally opened. Just look at the size of the men here to get some idea of the size of the dock and the ship. Let me go back a little bit. You can see here the blocks that are laid out that the ship is going to rest on. Here's another shot of the dock. It can be broken up into two docks. Here's a large cruiser here, and here's two small destroyers in the second part of the dock. So you can divide it into two docks. This one here is much larger. And let me go back. We seem to have a problem here. 1938, the project started. 16 sites around Australia were looked at. Garden Island got the nod. And then, of course, you're going to have to look at the harbour bed, which we're going to take over, what sort of rocks underneath it. And finally, we're going to build cofferdams. You'll see all this in pictures, but look at the size of the area we're going to contain, 13.4 hectares. Then there's going to be tunnels. A lot of this is going to be underground. This is wartime. The power stations, a lot of the pumps and that are going to be bomb-proofed. And you probably remember the MWS and DB, they're going to do the concrete work. We're going to need some massive amount of material to backfill here where we've reclaimed the ocean, the harbour. So we're going to set up a quarry at Ball's Head, a cofferdam to hold out the water, huge concrete plant. We're going to require hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete, cranes to help. And now we go, now a major thing happens here. Singapore, all of the ships that are fighting in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, if they need repair or any work done on them, they're using the Singapore dock. But of course, in 1942, the Japanese have it. So now Australia, it's either Australia, Pearl Harbor, or the United States. So the British ships are in big trouble here. If they're damaged, they've got to come to Australia, mainly to Cockatoo Island. Once the cofferdam is built that holds out all the water in the harbour, you pump it out, then start excavating. The easiest way to think of this dock is think of a huge building built on the harbour floor. That's the easiest way to think about it. Then, of course, there's the Japanese midget sub-attack, which gave everyone a scare. What happens if a torpedo hits the Kyosin, hits the dock with a ship inside? It would be absolute disaster. And then, of course, as things get really serious in the war with Singapore gone, the priority of this project goes from B to A1. This is the most important project in Australia, and it all gets started. We'll see photos of all of this. In its peak, it had 4,000 people. The massive pump house, we'll see photos of that. Then the Kyosin sits in grooves, some special timber to hold it there and seal the dock. And then the first dock draining, and then, of course, the cofferdams can be removed. The first docking is illustrious, as I mentioned. Then there's the official opening ceremony, Japanese surrender, and then all of the damaged ships, mainly the British ships and a lot of American ships, come to Sydney Harbour for repair. It's the only dock available to them before they get, so to enable them to get home. We'll see some statistics here. Don't spend too much time looking at it. I'll just highlight a couple. The pipes that pump the water out are 6 foot in diameter, which means you can empty an Olympic pool in 37 seconds. There are 3 of these pumps, and you can see the inner dock length is much bigger, nearly twice as large as the outer dock length, the way the dock can be divided into 2. Not going to mention all these, but just look at the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of dock excavation, backfill, concrete, enormous project with its own railway system during construction. And the Kyosin steel is it's nearly as many tons as a Navy ship. Here's a diagram here of the dock. This is the Kaizen that's going to hold out the harbour water here. And this area here is all going to be backfilled to join Garden Island to Potts Point. Now we see some photos so you can visualize the thing. This is the coffer dam here. That's holding out the water. Once that's built, you can start the pumps here and you can drain the water inside here. You can see a warship, quite a large warship out here. And you can see light towers here. This was a 24/7 operation round the clock. Another shot, we've now actually pumped all the water out. Now we're excavating. We need to excavate some of the harbour floor. Now, if you wondered, you've heard the term steamroller. Well, if you look here, that's a genuine steamroller, coal-fired steam. A lot of the equipment was, of course, required for the war. They struggled to get basic equipment. You can see the lighting towers around. And this is where we're going to get all the material for the backfill from. This is Ball's Point. And here, once again, by the way, the good quality coal went into the Navy ships. The poor quality coal went into equipment like this. Just look at the smoke. It's a steam shovel, but look at most of the work is done by hand, hard labor by men. And of course, when the materials are transported to Garden Island, it's unloaded. You can see here stuff dropping in. It's all done by hard manual labor. Some idea of the railway system that was built and the concrete plant to do all of this work. And here is the dock being constructed. Of course, the wharves that are going to go alongside it, this is some of it's going to be backfill. So you're going to have to drive piles down till you find something solid so you can build the wharves on top of that. You can see here what looks like some steam driven device for the pile driver. Now you can see the dock starting to take shape. These huge cranes over the top to transport all the material. You can see all the reinforcing steel here. Once again, the light towers, and of course the Navy ship out in the harbour. Another shot as it's developing, you can see the concrete's being built up either sides here. And here we are, we're close to finished here. And here we are, very nearly finished. So just think of a huge concrete building sitting on the harbour floor. And I mentioned about the capacity of the pumps. Just look at the diameter of that pump here. You can see a man here, it's 6 foot in diameter. To give you some idea of the problems the dock is currently under, a lot of this is now nearly 80 years old and it needs to be replaced. The foundries and engineering works that built all of this are no longer in existence in Australia. We have very little manufacturing capability. We're now dependent on other countries to maintain the most basic equipment of pipes for docks. Here's the caissons being built, the gates across the entry to the dock. You can see how huge they are. Look at the comparison of the men. Now, a caisson is literally a submarine type piece of equipment. It's got huge concrete ballast here to keep it upright, and it's got ballast tanks. You can either fill it with water and sink it, or you can pump the water out with, or force the water out with compressed air, and it will come up to the surface. So here's a caisson here, that's the gate to the dock. And here's one actually in the dock itself. This thing here is what goes into a groove in the dock to lock the caisson into the dock. It's built of special hardwood coming from South America to seal, to make a watertight seal. The pressure from the water outside is what really makes a seal. And the amount of steel in that is enough to make a submarine. This is Onslow at the museum, or to make this destroyer. Massive amount of steel in it. So who did all of this work? It was an organisation called the Civil Construction Corps. Well, you could get called up into this or you could volunteer. It didn't matter what age, 18 to 60. and it didn't matter about your background. You were going to do hard manual work, and you had to sign a document which said you can't strike, you can't refuse work. Whenever you're offered work, wherever that work is for the war effort, you're going to go out into often canvas camps and build roads, bridges, whatever. And of course, we did have the Midget's submarine attack. There were 3 of these Midget submarines, and one managed to get a torpedo under the cuttable. Does that look a little overcrowded to you? Well, it does to me. It was a dormitory ship moored at Garden Island. And of course, after the torpedo exploded underneath, it was destroyed. And how lucky can you get? This is where the Midget sub fired his torpedoes. If it was in a different position and hit the dam that's holding the water out, and the torpedo, this is the torpedo that didn't explode up against the Garden Island wall. If it hit the coffer dam and breached that, this project would have been in serious trouble. So sometimes you just get lucky. Now, the war artists, there were, of course, war photographers, war journalists, and these were the war artists that were chartered to make paintings and sketches of what happened in the war. You can see up the top is a name I'm sure most of you will recognise, William Dobell. We'll just look at 2 of them, Herbert McClintock, because there's a huge contrast between how they did it. Here's Dobell's, which is an abstract of a concrete working. That's the style of him. And here's McClintock, which is almost a photographic type thing in great detail. So people had their own styles to record the construction of the dock. There are thousands of photographs and drawings of the construction. People were really good at recording the whole project. So here we are, we're about to open it. It's the 24th of March in 1945. And His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester, who's at the moment, at that time, the Governor General, and we're going to bring a frigate into the dock. There's going to be a ribbon which is going to break, and then, of course, the ceremony will begin, and, of course, we're going to play Advance Australia Fair. So here's the dock with the ribbon across it. Here's the Lachlan breaking the ribbon coming into the dock, and I can remember from a little bit of national service, that looks like present arms to me, bayonets fixed, to salute the person, the Government General coming on board. And here, of course, is the inspection of the guard. So in addition to this, there was the hammerhead crane, which was essential to do the maintenance on the ships as well as the dock. The main equipment was brought from England, but the whole structure was built in Sydney. Gun turrets and engines in ships weigh hundreds of tons, so you need something really big to get this out to do the maintenance work on it. It was last used in '96, demolished in 2014, and that cost 10 million just to demolish it. Here it is in its heyday. I'm sure most of you would have seen it on the skyline at Garden Island, a very imposing presence. And here it is after 1996. It's suffered corrosion. It's, of course, in a salt air environment. There are pieces, the corrosion is so bad, there are pieces falling off it. So they have to put all this structure around it for the safety of the people below. And here's the largest ship, Anson, the battleship that's been in the dock, massive British battleship. Another shot of it. You can see the blocks on the bottom. And back here, just to give you some idea of the size again, that's 2 Navy people. All right, so, well, let's have a look at some statistics at the end here. Over 2,000 at the end of 2019. I haven't been able to get the latest statistics. And a lot of those were wet berths. A wet berth is you just bring your ship into the dock. You've now got calm water where you can do all sorts of interesting things with the ship. When a ship is damaged, either hit by a torpedo or something, it's going to list. you need to know how much water and oil you're going to have to pump to the other side to bring it back to upright. And of course, in planning experiments, is you can drag the ship over into a heeling position and then watch how it rights itself, how long it takes. So if you're in a huge sea, you now understand the behavior of the ship. Our aircraft carrier Melbourne has been in the dock 31 times. Vampire, which is at the museum, 38. A lot of the Oberon submarines that were mainly serviced at Cockatoo came here 40 towards the end of the Cockatoo life at Cockatoo. And our famous sailing ship, the James Craig, has been in 10 times. So, well, this is all very scientifically done. What could possibly go wrong in docking ships? Here's the Indian guided missile frigate, the Betwa, and here it is in dock. Somebody has moved fuel and water to one side of the ship. When you bring a ship into a dock to do this, the trim has to be perfect, fore and aft, side to side. As you can imagine, as it settles on those blocks, it needs to be in a very stable, upright, horizontal position, and it wasn't the case here. So this is a serious problem. Here's another shot of it capsized in the dock, and eventually an American salvage company gets it back upright, costing a fortune in the process. So that's the Captain Cook graving dock, and hope you enjoyed that. So time for questions.